This is Christina, Senior Product Manager for Tenant Scale in the enablement section. And with me is Mike Nichols today, our staff product designer. And we are going to walk you through the organization's idea in the next probably 15 to 20 minutes to give you a high-level overview of what our team is trying to do. So this is us, already introduced us, and I'm going to get started on a high-level overview of the organization goals and why we're building this in the first place. And Mike's going to give you a walk through the design part of this specific entity we're trying to build. All right, let's get started. So first and foremost, what is an organization? Why are we trying to build this in the first place? So the way we look at organizations is currently that it is a kind of umbrella for one or multiple top-level groups, pretty similar to what is happening on self-managed instances of GitLab today. We see them as isolated from each other. What this means for the features we currently have in the product, we'll discuss a bit later. And the reason why we need organizations is because they're the building block for cells. I've linked to a lot of documentation in the bottom of the slides. So we have blueprints available for both the organization and cells. So you can see in much more detail there what exactly it is that we're going to do with both of these entities. The high-level goals or the problems we're trying to solve with organizations are listed here. So one I've already mentioned that is going to be quite beneficial is that it enables grouping of top-level groups. This means once we create the organization GitLab, this will also include the top-level groups that are currently part of our organization or company, GitLab, for instance, gitlab.org or gitlab.com. We also want to have more isolation. We need these clear boundaries between organizations to move them onto cells. This will make sense once I walk you through the next one or two slides. This is very similar to how self-managed instances work. We're also expecting improved performance and availability. Because items are scoped to an organization, that means there's less data to search through. You don't have to look at all of GitLab anymore. You can look specifically at an organization because things will be linked to an organization ID. And because of the increased isolation, disturbances from neighbors shouldn't affect organizations as much anymore, especially if they are distributed across different cells. They allow us to integrate with cells. I've mentioned that already. Organizations enable us to have a place where you can control user profiles from an organization angle because it will be scoped to the organization. And basically, they bring you an on-premise-like experience as we have it on self-managed to SaaS or gitlab.com. And the organization owner in that context will have access to features that are currently just available to the admin that is able to access the admin area settings on self-managed instances. So basically, we also would empower organization owners to manage a lot of the things that currently GitLab admins do for them independently. What is a cell? So a cell is, I would say, one level higher than the organization. It's a scaling solution. We're looking into a horizontal scaling solution. In that case, we've already worked on database decompositions to keep up with vertical scaling, but this only reaches that far. So we need something that can scale with the size of our company, basically. We're expecting cells to be very resilient, to be independent from each other, and they can contain one or multiple organizations. So I think you could imagine a cell with only one organization, almost like a dedicated instance. So we're also looking into how we can combine all of these concepts together. Why do we need cells? Well, as I already mentioned, the decomposition work that our team and other teams have looked into in the past can only deliver quite a limited amount of scalability. So there is a limit to how far we can push that. And we need a more long-term oriented scalability strategy so that we can keep up with the growth of the business as it's currently happening. And this cells architecture creates many isolated GitLab instances that include all the required services so that they can essentially grow with us alongside the growth of the business. And as I have mentioned already, the other possible benefits are improved service availability. There's a lot of use cases we can expand into once this exists. And the way you can imagine it is drawn out here is that there's some very essential data that we have distributed across a shared layer. We call it the cluster layer or the cluster-wide database that feeds into isolated cells. And on these cells, you have different organizations. So just to get the terminology right. And with that, I'm already going to hand over to Mike, who will give you a bit of a walkthrough of the design we have planned. So I'm going to set you on the first one.
Sure. So in general, we've taken kind of an MVC approach, really targeted at meeting basically the minimum that we need for an MVC to unblock cells. And by and large, we've taken a lift and shift approach where we can, taking inspiration from, in some cases, the admin area, in some cases, groups, but in general, we kind of defaulted to existing screens where we could and leverage as much as we could so we can reuse without having to rebuild too much. But looking at organizations, the object themselves, we'll go through a couple of screens from that. So this first one here is the organization homepage. Fairly straightforward, just has quick links for groups, projects, and users, and then shows a group and project list that can be selected between frequently visited groups and frequently visited projects. Okay, next one. We'll also have an activity page. So this is kind of a overall arching activity page of the entire organization. So displays activity within the organization, and we will be introducing some filters by contribution type down the road. We'll also have a groups and projects page. This is kind of the directory of the organization, so listing of all of the groups and projects that are contained within the organization. And then we'll also have the ability to filter by the ability to see groups or projects, kind of combining the groups and projects page together, but in this first implementation, it'll be through a filter. We'll also have a list of users, so it displays an aggregated list of users within the organization. These are sourced from the groups and project members that that the organization contains, and also the possibility of directly invited users as well. Also settings, pretty minimal settings here. Again, going for that, what is just needed for the MVC. So things like the organization name, a description, an avatar, and then maybe the ability to change the organization URL. In addition to the organization object, we also looked how organizations fit into the overall GitLab product. One of the main ways that this presents itself is the organization switcher. So this switcher allows the user to navigate between organizations. It provides users with a path to get to the actual organization object itself. Defaults on the homepage there. But it also, maybe most importantly, provides context to the user of what organization that they're in, since users are now going to be in this world where changing organization does have impacts on what you can see. It's important to have a fairly visible upfront kind of indication of what organization that you're currently looking at. So it serves that purpose as well. So here is an example of what it looks like if you were to click on it. So opening up, it'll be a drop down. It'll show your current organization and allow you to switch to other organizations that you are a member of or user in. And then just some more context to show how this does impact some of the other screens that we see across GitLab. So things like your work will be scoped to that organization. So you might not see everything from every organization. When you're in a particular organization in your work, that will be scoped to your current organization. And that pattern kind of applies to several of, or really all of the screens and pages that we have in GitLab. And then there are a few other things that'll happen beyond just that switcher. The breadcrumbs will be affected. The organization will be added to the beginning of the breadcrumb there. And then in the global search as well, it'll provide another secondary path to get to, again, here you're trying to get to the organization object, the homepage really.
Oh yeah, and maybe a good thing to point out together with this is that the organization URL will be independent of group and project URLs. So it's not going to be the pattern as it is for breadcrumbs here, that it will be organization/group/project. The paths will not change because we have heard a lot of concerns from users, and the impact of that would be quite severe if the organization would change every single group and project path that currently exists. That's why we keep them separate.
Yep.
But in the breadcrumbs, you will be able to see the connection. All right, with that, let's go into the last section. We want to discuss a bit the impact of this isolation that the organization will introduce on just a few examples. So one of the consequences of the organization and cells work is that there will be more isolation, and this means that isolation will break existing features. We will approach the teams that own the various features that are affected by this and work together with them to find solutions. We have already looked at quite a long list of features. This is all documented in the cells blueprint. Most of them will be scoped to the organization, as Mike has already mentioned in the design walkthrough. Things like to-dos, issues, merge requests, they will all be scoped to the organization. So the number you see in the header on the left-hand side is tailored to this specific organization, for instance. The same is the case for the user profile. Now it threw me a couple of slides ahead. All right, back to this. The same is the case for the user profile. So you will see the contributions of a user to a specific organization and can then switch to another organization if you want to see that user's contributions there. We know that this has some consequences for users that work across a lot of organizations. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Generally, users will need to switch when they work between different organizations. There's also a couple of features we still discuss at the moment and are trying to develop solution proposals for. Amongst them are forking, personal namespaces. We looked at snippets as well. But I think what is better in that context is to make a separate walkthrough for all the features we have looked at so that you have some idea what the impacts are specifically for that. So I think we'll make a couple of shorter videos for snippets, explore, and so on, so that you can look at it there. Otherwise, this would become a bit too lengthy. Why do we think it is okay to break things in that way? It's probably a question that arises as you hear about all of this. There was some initial data exploration we did, and also some initial user research that our designers have done. And we have seen in both the data exploration and the feedback from users that the majority of users is actually only associated with a single organization, and they don't see it as a problem to have to switch contexts between multiple organizations if they do. So we have looked at data from SaaS specifically, 98% of users were only associated with a single organization. So in that case, we have modeled how many top-level groups form one organization. And 78% of users are only members of a single top-level group. So that's really the biggest chunk of our users. There's very few links between top-level groups. Only 0.5%, I think it was actually less than 0.5% of them share links across top-level groups. I don't know exactly how many of them would belong to the same organization. There's a limit to how far we can push this because we cannot match every top-level group to an organization that we know. So those are estimations, but this is what we have seen from those. And even if users have multiple top-level groups that can be matched to an organization, the median, it's distributed, of course, but the median number was around 3. So even if you have to go and manage across multiple top-level groups, it's still in an area that is manageable. So it's not hundreds, though we do have users, at least from what I have heard on self-managed, that have hundreds of top-level groups. So for them, that would be a problem, of course. But those are generally outliers, and we're trying to solve the problem for the majority first. Another aspect that is going to be impacted is global discoverability. This matters in the context of open source contributions. We have discussed this with the contributor success team already. Currently, Explore and Search go across everything that's on gitlab.com, but those will be scoped to the organization to start with. We don't think this is a problem initially, as this only becomes a bigger problem as more organizations start to exist. In the beginning, there will just be one default organization, so to speak. So you will be able to search across everything you know. And only as people start moving content into separate organizations will this become a problem. So we have some time to find good solutions for that. But it raises the question how contributors will find content or open source projects to contribute to moving forward if we do not build a solution to help them discover across organizations. This is something we're discussing and are trying to define solutions for at the moment in the issue I have linked to here. If you have any feedback, please feel free to add comments there or approach us directly so that we can have a discussion. Last but not least, a little bit of an outlook into our current roadmap. We're very busy working towards the organization MVC release. What the MVC exactly should contain is defined in the organization blueprint. We have divided that into 3 experimental phases: prototype, experiment, and beta. So currently we're doing everything we can to build out the prototype. Hopefully by the end of October, we'll then spend another couple of milestones to add more functionality. This is all defined in the blueprint, and working towards releasing the MVC, hopefully by Q1 2025. So at some point between the end of January next year and the beginning of April. We are working on cells in parallel. There's a lot of work streams that we're trying to work through to add functionality to cells. Currently, we're working on the ability to create a group on a cell, moving to the ability to create a project on a cell in the current quarter, and also looking into routing. I think there's more than 10 different work streams, so we're also looking into how we can divide the outstanding work for the next quarters, and we will need help from other teams to look into their specific feature areas. For instance, the ability to push into a cell. That probably is something the source code team needs to help us with. And there's more of these sub work streams that we will approach other teams and start solutioning together with them to help us build this out. If you want additional information, as I have mentioned already, please take a look at the organization blueprint or the cells blueprint. We're updating that literally on a daily up to weekly basis. If you have questions, you can always raise an MR against those, approach me or approach Mike, or find us in the Tenant Scale Slack channel. And we're happy to answer any questions and are looking forward to future discussions with you. So with that, thank you. And we'll share more details in upcoming videos.